Hey guys, Rick Stone here from Stoney Acres Gardening. Welcome to my channel. Today we are going to be talking about thinning apples. So we're going to talk about why we're going to thin apples, we're going to talk about when and how. So if you're just here for the when and how, here's a timestamp for you. You can skip forward and learn when and how you should be doing it, but I'm going to take just a minute to talk about the importance of why we should actually be thinning our apple trees as well. So I'm standing here in front of our early Fuji apple tree. And you can see from some of these cutaways that we've got a pretty heavy load of apples on this tree this year. We had a really nice bloom, good weather at the time that we were blooming, and so we've got a lot of fruit set. And there's too much fruit on this tree. So let's talk about the 4 reasons why we ought to be thinning our apple trees. Reason number 1 is just overall weight and stress on the tree. So with a heavy fruit load, you're going to be putting a lot of stress on those branches. Those branches, as that fruit continues to develop, are going to get weighed down. It's going to increase the chance that you're going to actually break those branches, and it's going to just put overall stress on the tree. If I were to leave all of this fruit on the tree, I know what it's going to look like by the end of the season. It's just going to be burned out and stressed out and broken branches all over the place. And so we thin to make sure that we don't have too much weight overall on the tree. Reason number 2 is so we have better fruit. When we thin, it allows the tree to focus and concentrate more energy on the fruit that's left over. That's going to give us bigger fruit, and it's also going to give us sweeter fruit, both of which we really want and are, it's going to benefit overall the harvest of the tree. So thinning is going to give us bigger and sweeter fruit. Reason number 3 is actually a very important one. If you leave too much fruit on an apple tree, it can get locked into a cycle, and that is it's a 2-year cycle. So as what will happen to the tree is if you leave too much fruit on, it gets locked into this biannual cycle where it produces lots of fruit one year, and then the next year it will produce almost no fruit or possibly no fruit at all. So you'll have this heavy harvest and then a light harvest. And without thinning, and thinning fairly early, it can get that tree locked into that cycle. And so it's important that we thin to keep it from getting locked into that cycle so that we have a harvest every year off of that tree. And if you don't thin early, then you can definitely get locked into that cycle. The last reason why we want to thin is for coddling moth control. Now, I know this one's going to sound a little funny, but coddling moth adults actually prefer to lay their eggs in the areas where apples are touching each other. So if we don't have areas where apples are touching each other, there's going to be less coddling moth activity in those areas. And so if we thin so that the apples are not touching each other, then we are going to have much more success at keeping coddling moth away. Now, it's not going to be a perfect cure, obviously, but it will help to kind of thin down the damage that you're going to have in that tree if we don't have fruit touching. And so that's another benefit of thinning. Now let's talk about when we should be thinning. So there's a couple of things that you want to look at. First off is fruit size. So we want to be thinning this fruit when these apples are marble sized or just a little bit bigger. So it's time for me to be thinning this fruit. These are getting a little bit big. We want to make it happen ASAP. The other thing is kind of a timing issue. We want to be thinning somewhere between 4 to 6 weeks after our full bloom. So not when the first blooms show up on the tree, but when we're in full bloom. That's kind of the target date, somewhere between 4 to 6 weeks. The reason why that's important is because that's the time frame where the tree starts to get those signals that are going to put it into that every other year cycle. And so we want to hit that window, and I'm right at the outside edge of that window, so we're going to get this tree thinned today because we're right at about 6 weeks since that bloom. Let's talk about how to thin our apple trees. So the first thing, there's 2 things you really need to worry about: spacing and clusters. So the first thing we want to do is remember the coddling moth like to lay their eggs in these areas where the apples are touching. So apples tend to blossom and set fruit in clusters like this. Sometimes there'll be as many as 4 fruit in these clusters. We don't want fruit that are touching. So we're going to go ahead and come in here and thin out a couple of these right there. I like to use a pair of trimmers. You don't have to. You can kind of just pop them off with your finger if you want. Trimmers just seem to work really well for me, and so we're going to go ahead and just trim those guys off. Now, these can go in your compost. It'll take a little bit extra time for them to decompose, but they should, do well in your compost. You can just let them fall on the ground in your orchard if you want also, but I like to throw them in the compost bin. Now, the other thing that we need to look at is spacing, and we want to make sure that we have about one fruit for every 6 to 8 inches of branch. So we've got a nice branch here. We've got another cluster. It has 2 fruit on it, so we're going to take one of them off. I usually will select the biggest of the fruit is how I'm going to make my choice there. And then we just want to make sure that they're 6 to 8 inches apart. So what I've done is I just have a little stick that I carry around in my pocket. Honestly, after you've done this for a bit, you're really not going to need the stick anymore. But I just kind of will hold this up and measure. And so I've got a mark. This is 6 inches. The stick itself is 8 inches. So anywhere in this range is going to be okay. So these 2 apples are fine. So we're going to go ahead and just leave them there. But if you look back here, there's one more cluster that's a little bit too close. And so we're going to go ahead and take both of those off, and then we're in pretty good shape. So rules are, get rid of the clusters. We want 1 fruit left per cluster, and then we want 6 to 8 inches of space between each of the fruit on the trees. So it's that simple. So let's do a little demonstration here using this branch as an example. So you can see this branch has a lot of fruit on it. There are several dozen fruit. If we can see all the way down here, there's just a ton of fruit on this branch. And so we want to thin this up a lot because there's so much weight on this little branch that it's just going to get squashed and probably torn off the tree if we don't do something about it. So first off, I like to, anything that's way out here on the ends, so we've got some right here, those are just too far out for such a thin branch. So we're going to go ahead and cut those right off. And then we've got this cluster right here, and then see how close that is. That's well within 6 inches. It's only about 3 inches. And so we're going to go ahead, and we just don't want this cluster at all down here on the bottom. Then we've got this cluster, which has 3 good fruit on it. And so we're going to just go ahead and thin it down to 1. And then if you look right here, we've got a little cluster right there. Yeah, that one is probably a little bit too close. So we're going to go ahead and thin that. And then let's move the camera just a little bit so that you guys can see down this way. So now let's go ahead and get our measure out. And here we've got our next cluster down the branch is right there, okay? So if you can see that, we're about 8 inches. That's perfect spacing right now. So we're going to go ahead, and this is the next cluster that we want to keep on this branch. So we're going to go ahead, choose the best right there. We're going to leave that one. Then right here on top of this branch is another fruit that's too close. So we're going to thin that one out. And then we've got a cluster right here that's actually kind of on its own separate little branch. But look right here, ton of fruit on the end of this. So we're going to just go ahead and thin those right off. And then we're going to go ahead and leave this fruit and thin these guys right off, so that we then have, see, even those are a little bit too close in their spacing. So we're going to choose one of these. I think we'll take that one off and leave this one. So we went from about 20 fruit. Oh, look, and then this is perfect because right down here, can you guys see that one? Right down here, there is another fruit, and spacing on that one is about 6 inches, 8 inches away. And so we'll go ahead and we're just going to pop that one off. There's a little fruit right there, and that one is actually in good shape. So now this branch is in good shape. We've thinned it down to where there are only 4 fruit on that branch. That's a good load for that little branch, and so that's a good example of how to thin your fruit. Okay, so there we go. That is how you thin apples on your apple tree, and you should be doing this every year, again 4 to 6 weeks after full bloom. Although, one thing that I want to point out to everybody is it's never too late to thin. So you may lose some of the benefits, like of keeping the tree from cycling and some of the fruit size benefits, but you can always thin to reduce weight load. And so it's never too late. If you don't get it done at the right time, that doesn't mean you just abandon the tree for the year. You want to go ahead and thin to get that weight load off and to get the stress down on the tree overall for the season. So it's never too late to thin. Also really never too early to thin. You just want to wait until that fruit starts to develop so that you can tell which fruit are actually going to be viable. So one other thing that we like to do is, again, this is coddling moth prevention, is we use these organza bags to protect our fruit from coddling moth. It's a lot of work, okay, to use these, but it's a good organic method for protecting your fruit from the coddling moth problems. I've actually got a whole video that I filmed on how to use these organza bags. If you'd like to check that out, the link is right up there and you can go check that out, okay? All right, so that is thinning fruit and how to care for it early on in the season on our apple trees. Hopefully you guys liked this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. Make sure you get subscribed to my channel, and we will be back again next week with another great gardening tip. Happy gardening. Hey guys, thanks again for watching, and make sure you get subscribed to my channel. Here's a couple of videos that YouTube thinks you're really going to enjoy. And I also wanted to have you go check out the Gardening Academy, which is our monthly membership service where we grow great gardeners. There's a link in the description of this video you can click on to learn more, but I'd love to have you join us over there. Happy gardening.